Assalamualaikum and hi. My name is NABIHA HUDA binti KAMAL and my metric number is 297289. Before we go into the issues, I will briefly introduce the background of this case. Carsem Sdn Bhd is a well-established semiconductor company based in Ipoh, Perak and has been operating since 1972. The company specializes in semiconductor assembly, packaging and testing, and serves various global industries such as automotive, telecommunications, and consumer electronics. Carsem operates under the Malaysian Pacific Industries Group, which is part of the Hong Leong Group, and has manufacturing facilities in Malaysia and China. Overall, Carsem is recognized as a reputable and established organization in the semiconductor industry. However, despite its strong reputation, the company became involved in a legal dispute with its former human resource manager, Fatimah Noordin, regarding the termination of her employment. The matter was brought to the Court of Appeal, where the court questioned whether the separation agreement was genuinely agreed to. This case is important because it highlights how termination decisions must be handled carefully, especially in terms of fairness, due process, and good industrial relations.
Good day, everyone. My name is UMAIRAH binti JAMIRAN, and my matrix number is 297269. So to continue, we will be analyzing the case of Fatimah and her termination from Carsem Sdn Bhd. So through our review, we actually have identified around 8 critical legal and industrial relation issues. So our first identified issue is possible unfair dismissal. While the company presented a mutual separation agreement or MSA, the evidence shows that it was not signed voluntarily. So Fatima was pressured into signing and was denied sufficient time to read the document or seek any type of legal counsel. So under Section 20 of the Industrial Relations Act, a termination must be based on just cause or excuse. So a forced agreement is not a genuine consensus, making this a clear case of constructive or unfair dismissal.
When looking at what Carsem Sdn Bhd should have done, we have to start with the legal foundation. According to the law, specifically Section 20 of the IRA 1967, every employee is protected from being fired unless the company has a just cause or a very good reason. Beyond the written law, employers also have a general duty to treat their workers fairly and with respect, rather than acting in a mean or random way. If a company ignores this obligation, they risk being taken to court where they might have to pay the employee for damages. So to avoid these issues, the company should focus on preventive action. For example, any mutual separation agreement, MSA, needs to be a real two-way understanding. It shouldn't feel like the employee is being forced to sign under pressure. It is also best practice to give employees a few days to look over the terms so they don't feel rushed into a questionable signature. Most importantly, if there are problems with how someone is working or behaving, the company should stick to formal steps like warnings and investigations. They shouldn't try to take a shortcut by using a quickly signed agreement to bypass proper disciplinary procedures.
So we're moving on to issue number 2, which is the breach of industrial harmony. So beyond the dismissal itself, the employer's conduct was inherently unfair. Specifically, the employer who refused to pay the 50,000 ringgit promised under the MSA. And furthermore, the court later validated that Fatimah did not sign the agreement of her own free will. So this violates the core principle of Section 30, which mandates that the industrial court act according to equity, good conscience, and the substantial merits of the case. So the company's behavior completely disregarded these basic IR expectations.
If we want to avoid a massive legal bill like the 177,000 award in the Fatimah case, we need to focus on being fair and following the rules, rather than just rushing someone out the door. At the end of the day, every employee has an unwritten duty to maintain a relationship of trust. You can't act in a way that is unfair or vindictive. In this specific case, the company really messed up by pressuring an employee into a questionable agreement and then To make matters worse, refusing to pay the 50,000 ringgit they actually promised. That's a clear breach of good faith, and it makes the whole employment contract fall apart. And to prevent this, we should always treat a mutual separation agreement (MSA) as a real deal where both sides agree freely. A simple fix would have been giving her a cooling off period, just a few days to look over the paperwork and talk to a lawyer. This proves she wasn't forced and satisfied the court's requirement for good conscience and equity under the Industrial Relations Act. In addition, if there were actually problems with her work, the company should have just stuck to the standard playbook, send a formal show cause letter and show a domestic inquiry. This gives the employee a fair chance to tell their side of the story. By following these steps, we ensure any termination is legally solid and we protect the company from being sued for unfair dismissal.
So now, third, we will look at the lack of due process. So Carsem terminated Fatimah without following any standard disciplinary procedures. So meaning there was no show cause letter, no DI or domestic inquiry, and most importantly, there wasn't any opportunity for Fatimah to explain her side of the story. So this is a direct violation of the principles of natural justice and also Section 35 of the IRA 1967. Employees are legally required to act reasonably and allow an employee to be heard before making decisions that fundamentally end their livelihood.
Moving forward, it is important to understand what the company should have done differently. Legally, employers have an obligation of trust and confidence. This means they cannot fire people based on a whim or as an act of revenge. They must act in a good faith and with high professional standards. In this case, using a mutual separation agreement (MSA) as a shortcut to avoid a proper investigation is seen as acting in bad faith. The court expects management to be meticulous and follow their own company policies to the letter. Anything less is considered a failure of managerial accountability. To avoid these issues in the future, the company should focus on procedural fairness. First, if a separation agreement is signed, it must be truly mutual. The employee needs reasonable time to think it over or talk to a lawyer so they don't feel pressured. Second, there must be a paper trail. Employers carry the burden of proof, so they must maintain detailed logs of performance or misconduct to show just cause. Finally, unless the employee has committed a very serious crime, the company should use a letter of warnings, starting with verbal and written warnings before jumping to termination shows that the company tried to be fair and gave the employee a chance to improve.
Finally, issue number 4, it concerns the breach of contractual obligations. Even if we were to look at this strictly as a business transaction, the company failed. They promised a sum of 50,000 ringgit, but they failed to pay. So this goes against Section 13(2) of the Employment Act 1955 and the Contracts Act 1950. By failing to honor the financial terms of their own agreement, the company proved that they were not acting in good faith, which further damages the employer and employee relationship.
From a legal standpoint, once a mutual separation agreement is signed, it becomes a legally binding contract, and the employer is compelled by law to follow its terms. Under the Employment Act, it is mandatory for employers to follow rules regarding termination payments, and failing to do so is a clear violation of the law. Furthermore, the Industrial Relations Act 1967 requires fairness and sound judgment. Making a financial promise to settle a case and then refusing to pay simply does not meet the legal standard of fairness. To prevent these serious legal issues, Carsem should have taken several preventive steps. First, management must ensure that all financial obligations are clearly documented and paid within the agreed upon time to avoid breach of contract claims. They should also balance the company's interests with the legal rights of their employees. To ensure an agreement is valid and not seen as dubious or forced, employees should be given enough time to review documents and talk to a lawyer before signing. If a court finds that a contract was forced or coerced, they can set it aside, which puts the company in difficult positions where they must then prove they had a just cause for the dismissal in the first place.
Good day to doctor and friends. My name is Preethi and my metric number is 296683. For issue 5, the industrial relation problem here is retaliatory conduct or victimization of the employee, which relates to section 4.1 of the Industrial Relation Act 1967. After Fatimah's employment ended, Carsem took legal action against her and accused her of making secret profits. However, the court later found that these allegations were not proven. This situation can be viewed as a retaliatory because the action was taken after the challenges her termination. Under Section 4.1, employers are not allowed to threaten or interfere with an employee's rights. When an employer behaves in this way, it creates fear, insecurity among employees and negatively affects trust in organization.
So basically, under issue 5, Carsem should have not taken retaliatory actions against the employee after her terminations, because any legal action should have be only taken if there is clear evidence of misconduct and not as a response to the employer as exercising her right to challenge the dismissal. What is the legal support? Under Section 4, Subsection 1, Industrial Relations Act 1967 prohibits employers from threatening, coercing, or interfering with an employee's right. So, how can the conflict be avoided? Like all the legal supports, avoiding retaliatory behavior would have reduced tensions, and actually it can prevent the dispute from make it more further.
Moving on to issue 6, which is poor HR governance and mismanagement. This issue is particularly serious because Fatimah herself was the HR manager. The case highlights weakness in Carsem internal HR practices, especially in handling sensitive matters such as termination. Effective HR governance requires fairness, transparency, and consistency. However, the way the company handled this case shows a failure to follow proper HR procedures and best practices. As a result, employee confidence in the HR system is weakened, which can lead to long-term industrial relation problem.
Under issue 6, what Carsem should have done? So Carsem should have practiced proper HR governance by ensuring clear policies, ethical decision making, and fair handling of termination matters, especially when it is involved to senior HR personnel. Any legal support? Yes. Common law duty of employers to act in good faith. Basically, not only that, industrial relations also have the best practice that require consistency and accountability in HR management.
Wow!
And then how can the conflict be avoided? Apply the good HR governance would actually have ensured lawful procedures if they were followed and minimize the risk of the industrial disputes.
Next is issue 7, which involves the failure to uphold employee rights and the principles of natural justice under Section 3.5 of the Industrial Relation Act 1967. Fatimah was not given sufficient time to review the mutual separation agreement, nor was she given the opportunity to seek legal advice. Natural justice requires that employees be properly informed and given a fair chance to understand decisions that affect their employment. By denying her this opportunity, the company acted unfairly and failed to observe the principle of equity and conscience required under the Act.
Under issue 7, what Carsem should have done? Again, Carsem should have given the employees sufficient time to review the mutual separation agreement. Okay, do not rush her or do not rush anyone, and allow her to seek legal advice before signing. And legal support? Yes. So, under Section 30, Subsection 5 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967, which allows the industrial court to consider equity and fairness. And the other is common law actually requires fairness and inform the consent. Of course, how can the conflict be avoided? By respecting employee rights, would have ensured procedural fairness and prevented the agreement from being challenged in court.
Lastly, issue 8 relates to the negative impact on employee morale and company reputation, which is connected to Section 8 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967. Because this case became public and involved court proceedings, Carsem reputation as an employee was affected. When employees see such disputes, it can reduce moral, trust and loyalty in the workplace. Section 8 emphasized the importance of maintaining harmonious of industrial relations, but this harmony was clearly disrupted. A damaged reputation can also affect future requirement and overall workplace stability. Thank you.
Lastly, under issue 8, what Carsem Sdn Bhd should have done. Carsem Sdn Bhd should have handled the terminations professionally and resolved disputes internally to maintain employee trust and industrial harmony. So, to support this statement, the legal action is the Industrial Relations Act 1967, which it emphasizes maintaining harmonious employee relationships. So how can the conflict be avoided? By applying ethical and transparent during the handling would have prevented public litigations and protected the company's reputation.
To conclude, this case shows that even well-established companies can face serious industrial relations problems when termination is not handled properly. The situation highlights the importance of fairness, transparency, and following proper procedures when making decisions that affect employees. The court's decision sends a clear message that employers must act in good faith and respect employee rights. Overall, this case reminds us that maintaining healthy industrial relations depends not only on company policies but also on ethical leadership and responsible HR practices. That's all from us. Thank you.